You didn't do anything wrong today. So why does the simplest task on your list suddenly feel like it's wearing a weighted vest? You sent the email you always send. You held the boundary you usually hold without a second thought. And somehow, it took twice the effort it normally takes. And by the end of it, you were oddly, disproportionately tired. The kind of tired that doesn't match what you actually did. That's not in your head. It's not a coincidence. And it started a few days ago, whether you noticed it arriving or not. Maybe it wasn't an email. Maybe it was a conversation you've had 100 times before, and this time it took more out of you than it should have. Maybe it was just getting through a to-do list that, on paper, looked like an easy day. The details change from person to person. The underlying weight doesn't. Right now, two planets that rarely get along are closing the distance between them. One just moved into a sign that makes it act on instinct instead of strategy. The other has been holding the same few degrees of sky for weeks, standing its ground in territory it already crossed once earlier this year. Neither one has finished moving. The exact hit is still roughly 2.5 weeks away. But here's what almost nobody tells you about pressure like this. You don't need to wait for the moment of impact to register it. Long before a fault line actually slips, instruments buried in the ground pick up movement measured in millimeters, sometimes years before the event everyone eventually feels. The buildup is always measurable before the release is visible. This is that kind of buildup. And there are 5 specific checkable ways it has probably already shown up in your week, whether or not you've had a word for it until now. Let's start with what's actually happening up there, because the why makes the 5 signs make a lot more sense. A few days ago, Mars moved out of the sign it had been sitting in and into Cancer, a sign that runs on instinct, protection, and gut feeling rather than calculation. Mars is the planet of drive, want, and forward motion. Wherever it lands, it wants to act now, without waiting for permission. Meanwhile, Saturn has spent weeks parked in the same narrow stretch of Aries, and it's not there by accident either. Saturn turned retrograde in late July, which means it's currently walking backward across ground it already crossed once, moving forward earlier in the year. That's the detail almost nobody mentions, and it's worth sitting with for a second. This isn't a new wall showing up out of nowhere. It's a wall you already met once, quietly, months ago, before it turned around to check whether you actually dealt with it the first time. So you've got drive that wants to move without thinking, and structure that's revisiting an old boundary to see if it still holds. Those two are drawing closer together, degree by degree, and they'll meet exactly in a couple of weeks. But the friction between them doesn't wait politely for the exact date. It builds the entire time the gap is closing, which means it's already active, right now, underneath whatever your week has actually looked like. In astrology, a square is the angle of 90 degrees, and it's traditionally read as the aspect that forces something to actually happen. It's not a gentle nudge like a trine, where two planets simply agree with each other. A square is two forces that don't naturally cooperate, working at cross purposes until something in the middle gives. That's usually treated as uncomfortable, and it usually is, but it's also the aspect most consistently tied to real, lasting change, precisely because agreement never demanded anything of you and friction does. Cancer, where Mars is now sitting, doesn't want to argue its case or build a 5-year plan. It wants to protect what it cares about immediately on instinct. Aries, where Saturn is standing its ground, is normally the sign of the first move, the fastest reflex in the zodiac. except Saturn slows down anything it touches, so here it becomes the sign of a reflex that's been told to wait. Put an instinctive, protective urgency across the sky from a delayed, restrained instinct, and you get exactly the kind of pressure that shows up in a body and a schedule before it shows up as a clean, nameable feeling. One more detail makes this sharper rather than softer. Cancer and Aries are both what astrologers call cardinal signs, along with Libra and Capricorn, the signs tied to the start of each season, built to initiate rather than maintain. This isn't drive running into a passive obstacle that just sits there and absorbs the impact. It's one initiating energy running straight into another initiating energy that happens to be moving in the opposite direction. Mars wants to start protecting right now. Saturn, revisiting old ground, wants to start reinforcing a boundary right now. Both are wired to act first and ask questions later. They just disagree completely on what the first move should be. There's one more piece worth knowing, because it explains why this particular buildup feels different from most. Mars is fast. On an ordinary day, it can move roughly half a degree to 3/4 of a degree across the sky. Saturn, especially while retrograde, barely moves at all. A few hundredths of a degree, some days almost nothing. So this isn't really two planets rushing toward each other. It's one planet sprinting toward another that's standing almost completely still, arms folded, waiting to see what happens when the sprinting one arrives. That's a very different kind of tension than two fast-moving planets crossing paths and moving on. This one has time to build precisely because one side of it isn't going anywhere. Here's the first sign, and it's easy to miss because it doesn't look like astrology at all. It looks like you snapping at a slow website. Back in 1939, a group of psychologists put forward what's now called the frustration-aggression hypothesis. The finding that when a goal-directed action gets blocked, even by something small, and every day, it reliably produces a spike in irritability. Not because the person is unstable or dramatic, but because drive that gets stopped has to go somewhere, and it usually goes sideways onto whatever's closest. Right now, with Mars wanting to move and Saturn quietly checking whether the old rules still apply, ordinary small obstacles, a slow Wi-Fi connection, a stuck jar lid, a reply that takes longer than it should, are landing on top of a system that's already carrying extra charge. So the reaction ends up bigger than the trigger actually deserves. If you've caught yourself getting disproportionately annoyed at something genuinely minor over the last few days, not the big stuff, the small stuff, that's sign one. It isn't a character flaw, it's a loaded spring, meeting a light touch. There's usually a second layer to this one that's worth watching for too. It's rarely the first small annoyance of the day that gets the biggest reaction. It's the second or third, the one that arrives after you've already spent effort holding the first one in. A short reply to a text that didn't deserve one. A sharper tone with someone who just asked an ordinary question. If you noticed yourself apologizing afterward, slightly confused about where that came from, that's the same sign wearing a different outfit. The second sign shows up before you've said a single word about how you feel, because your body says it first. Sustained low-grade pressure has a well-documented physical signature, an unconscious bracing pattern, a tightened jaw, shoulders creeping up toward the ears, hands curling slightly without being asked to, a diaphragm that isn't quite getting a full breath. Physical therapists and stress researchers both track this pattern, and most people don't consciously choose it or even notice it until someone points it out. It makes sense here. Mars is the urge to act. Saturn is the instruction to hold. And the muscles are literally holding a stance nobody consciously assigned them. Try this for a second, right now, while you're listening. Check your jaw, check your shoulders, check your hands. If you just release something without meaning to, that's sign 2, and it was there before you knew to go looking for it. This one tends to show up in small, almost forgettable moments across the day, rather than one dramatic instance. The way you grip a steering wheel a little tighter than the traffic actually calls for. The way your hand curls around a phone or a cup without any real need to hold it that firmly. None of that is dangerous or unusual on its own. It's just your nervous system keeping a low, steady brace running in the background, the same way you'd tense up walking into a room where you expected an argument. Except here, there's no room and no argument. Just the general shape of the pressure, held in the body because it hasn't been given anywhere else to go yet. The third sign is strange because it isn't laziness, even though from the outside it looks exactly like laziness. Researchers studying motivation once described something called approach avoidance conflict. What happens when a single goal carries both a genuine pull toward it and a real or perceived cost attached to reaching it? People don't freeze evenly across every task on their list when this happens. They freeze very specifically on the one task where the wanting and the caution are both running highest at the same time, while everything else, oddly, gets easier to do because it isn't carrying the same charge. That's Mars's want colliding with Saturn's caution, both aimed at the exact same object. If there's been one specific thing on your list this week, one email, one conversation, one decision, that you've quietly rearranged your entire day around avoiding, while somehow getting several other, harder things done instead, that's sign 3. You can usually spot it by how you talk about it, even just to yourself. It's the task you describe as, "I'll get to it," rather than one you've actually decided against. You might have opened the message and closed it again without replying. You might have started typing the email 3 separate times. That specific loop, open, consider, close, repeat, is the tell. It's not that the task is too hard. It's that some part of you wants to move on it, and some part of you is checking the cost first. And right now, those two parts are taking unusually long to agree. The fourth sign happens while you're not even conscious to notice it happening. There's a real difference between trouble falling asleep and waking up cleanly in the middle of the night with your mind already switched on. The first usually tracks with racing thoughts at bedtime. The second, a clean, alert wake-up somewhere in the early hours, not groggy, just abruptly on, has been linked in sleep research to unresolved tension the body hasn't finished processing yet, rather than to tiredness itself. This isn't something to diagnose or worry over. It's just worth noticing as data. If you've had even one night this week where you woke somewhere in the early hours and your brain was immediately fully online the second your eyes opened, that's sign 4. What usually gives it away is what happens in the minutes right after. If you drift back off within a few minutes without much thought, that's likely just an ordinary wake-up, the kind everyone has now and then. But if your mind immediately reaches for something specific, the exact conversation you're avoiding, the exact form that annoyed you, the exact thing your shoulders have been bracing against all week, that's the pattern worth noticing. The timing isn't random. It's simply the one part of the day when nothing else is competing for your attention, so whatever's been waiting quietly in the background finally gets a clear turn. The fifth sign is the one most people write off as the world just being annoying today, except the annoyance is oddly specific, and it's aimed at one particular kind of thing. Back in 1966, a psychologist named Jack Bream described what's now called psychological reactance, the well-documented tendency for people to push back harder against a rule, restriction, or authority the moment it feels like it's limiting their freedom, even when the restriction itself is small and ordinary. A form filled out the wrong way, a deadline that suddenly feels arbitrary, a "that's just how it's done" answer that would normally roll right off you. Mars is the drive to act freely and immediately. Saturn is, quite literally, the archetype of rules, structure, and gatekeeping. Put the two under pressure together, and this is exactly the dynamic that shows up in daily bureaucracy. If you've had a stronger reaction than usual to a form, a policy, or someone in a position of authority telling you no in the last few days, that's sign 5, and it was never really about the form. It also tends to show up in smaller, more mundane versions than an actual confrontation, a stronger than usual eye roll at a cue that isn't moving, more irritation than usual at a rule that's always existed and never bothered you before, an urge to point out exactly why a policy doesn't make sense to someone who didn't ask. None of that means you're wrong about the rule. It just means the part of you that normally shrugs and complies is, this week, doing a lot more arguing before it gets there. So what changes if you actually notice all this instead of just living inside it? Naming a pattern does something specific. It lets you respond to what's actually happening, a real, temporary tightening between drive and restraint, playing out on a schedule that has nothing to do with your character, instead of mistaking it for something wrong with you, or with a relationship, or with whichever unlucky circumstance happened to be standing nearby when the pressure needed somewhere to land. And here's the part worth holding on to. You don't have to wait for the exact date for any of this to be useful. Strain gauges buried along a fault line aren't valuable because they predict an earthquake to the minute. They're valuable because they let engineers reinforce what needs reinforcing while the ground is still just shifting, long before anything actually breaks. Nobody waits for the rupture to start paying attention to the data. The whole point of measuring the buildup is to act while it's still just a buildup. You're standing in that exact window right now. That's also the difference between this kind of pressure being useful and this kind of pressure being wasted. Left alone, drive that's been quietly blocked doesn't just disappear when the block lifts. It tends to leak out sideways in the smallest and least useful directions available. At a slow website, at your own reflection in the mirror, at someone who happened to ask an ordinary question at the wrong moment. None of those targets actually caused the pressure. They just happened to be standing closest when it needed somewhere to go. So instead of waiting, pick whichever one of these 5 you recognized most clearly in your own week and give it a real structured release before the gap fully closes. If it's sign 1, build in something physical today. Actual movement, not just gritted teeth patience. If it's sign 2, take 30 seconds, more than once today, to deliberately drop your shoulders and unclench your jaw, instead of waiting for someone else to notice you're holding them. If it's sign 3, block 20 real minutes for the one task you've been circling instead of doing. If it's sign 4, resist the urge to reach for your phone the moment you wake at an odd hour. Let your mind finish the thought it woke up with, instead of drowning it in something else. If it's sign 5, have the direct conversation instead of the internal argument about the rule. The point is the same in every case. Let Mars's energy move through Saturn's structure on purpose, instead of leaking out sideways as irritability, bracing, stalling, broken sleep, or friction with strangers who didn't deserve it. None of this is happening to you. It's happening around you, in a sky that doesn't know your name and never needed to. How you meet it is still entirely yours to decide. If one of these 5 landed harder than the others, you probably already knew which one it was before this sentence finished. And that's usually the one worth paying attention to first. Sit with it for a minute before you scroll on. Notice which sign was yours. And if tracking the sky against your actual week like this is useful to you, there's more of it coming as this particular pressure keeps building toward its exact date over the next couple of weeks. You're not imagining the weight. You're just early to notice it, and early is exactly when it's still useful to know. Go back to that weighted vest for a second. A weighted vest isn't actually a bad thing to be wearing. People put them on deliberately for training because carrying real resistance on purpose is exactly what builds the kind of strength that shows up later when it's needed. The only difference between a weighted vest that helps you and one that just wears you down is whether you know it's there and you're working with it, or whether you're carrying it by accident and calling it a bad week. You now know it's there. What you do with the next couple of weeks is entirely up to you.